Most people believe the strongest person is the one who speaks the loudest, reacts the fastest, or dominates every argument. That belief has fooled countless people for generations. Real psychological strength works very differently. The people who leave the deepest impact often stay calm while everyone else loses control. They understand a hidden truth that rarely gets attention. Every emotional reaction reveals information. Every angry response gives another person a chance to predict your next move. Every attempt to prove your worth hands over a little more control. Quiet minds are far harder to influence than restless ones. That is why the greatest victories often happen long before anyone realizes a battle has already been won. History, psychology, and modern behavioral research continue to point toward the same pattern. The people who master their emotions usually make better decisions under pressure, recover faster from setbacks, and earn greater respect over time. Their strength comes from discipline rather than noise. Their confidence comes from self-control rather than constant approval. Their influence grows because people struggle to manipulate someone who refuses to be emotionally pulled in every direction. This video explores 7 powerful psychological strategies that can help you stay composed when others try to provoke you, protect your peace when someone wants your attention, and build a mindset that becomes difficult to influence through fear, pressure, or emotional games. Each strategy is connected to real psychological principles that explain why people react the way they do, and why calm behavior often creates a stronger impact than force. Some of these ideas are used every day by skilled negotiators, respected leaders, and people who remain steady during stressful situations. Others are rarely discussed because they appear almost invisible from the outside, even though they quietly shape the outcome of countless interactions. As this journey continues, every lesson builds upon the previous one, creating a complete mental framework instead of a collection of random tips. One strategy will reveal why silence can become your greatest advantage. Another explains why emotional unpredictability can completely change the balance of a difficult relationship. You will also discover why certain people seem impossible to manipulate, even though they never threaten anyone or demand attention. The final strategy stands above all the others because it changes the foundation of how people see you. Once this principle becomes part of your thinking, the way others respond to your presence can begin to shift in surprising ways. It takes patience to develop, yet its effects often last far longer than any clever tactic or temporary victory. Stay with this video until the very end because every strategy connects with the next, and the final lesson brings everything together into one powerful way of thinking. Missing even one piece can leave the picture incomplete. Welcome to our channel, where psychology, human behavior, and practical wisdom come together to help you build a stronger mind and a calmer life. Subscribe and join our community for more powerful insights that help you understand people, strengthen your mindset, and approach every challenge with greater confidence and clarity. Every conflict begins with a choice, even though it rarely feels that way in the moment. Someone says something disrespectful. Someone questions your ability. Someone spreads a rumor, pushes your patience, or tries to make you lose your temper. Their goal is often much bigger than winning a single argument. They want to pull you into an emotional state where your thinking becomes rushed and your decisions become predictable. Psychology explains this through emotional reactivity. Strong emotions narrow attention and increase impulsive behavior. When people become angry or defensive, they usually focus on protecting their pride instead of choosing the response that truly serves their long-term interests. A person who understands this pattern can deliberately push emotional buttons because they expect the reaction to do the work for them. Once they see frustration on your face or hear it in your voice, they begin collecting valuable information. They learn which words affect you most, which situations make you uncomfortable, and how far they can push before you respond. Every visible emotional outburst becomes feedback that helps them adjust their next move. That is why some people continue repeating the same behavior. They believe they have found a reliable way to influence your actions. The surprising part is that people often mistake emotional reactions for strength. Speaking louder may feel powerful for a brief moment, yet it usually gives away more than it gains. Calm people reveal very little. They force others to deal with uncertainty, and uncertainty creates discomfort. Human beings naturally look for patterns because the brain wants to predict what comes next. When someone cannot predict your emotional response, they begin questioning their own approach. Their confidence starts to weaken because the expected reward never arrives. This simple shift changes the emotional balance of the interaction without a single threat or dramatic display. This ability comes from cognitive control, the mental process that allows you to pause before reacting. Instead of allowing emotions to take control, the brain's higher thinking processes step in and evaluate the situation. That short pause creates space between the trigger and the response. Inside that space, better decisions become possible. Emotional self-regulation does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending they do not exist. It means recognizing the emotion, understanding why it appeared, and choosing the response that aligns with your goals instead of your impulse. People who master this skill become much harder to manipulate because their actions are guided by intention rather than pressure. Once emotional control becomes your habit, the next step becomes even more powerful. Instead of simply resisting manipulation, you begin changing the expectations of everyone who tries to predict you, and that is where the first psychological strategy begins. People naturally search for patterns in the behavior of everyone around them. This habit allows the brain to predict future actions, reduce uncertainty, and decide how to respond. Someone who wants to influence or provoke you depends heavily on this ability. They watch your expressions, your tone of voice, your timing, and even your smallest habits. After enough observations, they begin believing they know exactly how you will react in almost every situation. A certain insult brings anger. A certain criticism creates defensiveness. A certain compliment lowers your guard. Once these emotional patterns become predictable, controlling the interaction becomes much easier because your response arrives exactly as expected. The person pushing your buttons no longer needs to guess. They simply repeat the trigger that has worked before. This is why predictable emotional behavior can quietly become a weakness, even when the emotions themselves are completely understandable. Psychologists describe a powerful effect called expectancy violation. It happens when someone expects one reaction but receives something completely different. The brain immediately pauses because its prediction has failed. During that brief moment, attention shifts away from controlling another person and toward understanding the unexpected response. Instead of becoming angry after an insult, you answer with steady confidence. Instead of rushing to defend yourself against false accusations, you calmly ask a thoughtful question. Instead of showing visible frustration when someone tries to provoke you, your expression remains relaxed and your words stay measured. Suddenly, the other person loses the certainty they were counting on. They begin wondering whether their strategy is failing, or whether they misunderstood you from the beginning. That uncertainty changes the emotional balance of the conversation far more effectively than raising your voice ever could. This does not mean acting like someone else, or pretending to feel emotions that are absent. Genuine emotional discipline is very different from playing mind games. It comes from understanding your feelings without allowing them to dictate every action. Calm responses carry weight because they are real, steady, and consistent over time. People eventually realize they cannot predict your behavior simply by creating pressure. They stop expecting instant emotional rewards because those rewards never arrive. As a result, they become more cautious with their words and decisions. Some even begin questioning whether continuing the conflict is worth the effort. Emotional discipline quietly reshapes the entire interaction because your actions are guided by purpose instead of impulse. Every measured response strengthens your self-control while weakening another person's confidence in their ability to manipulate you. Once you stop giving predictable emotional reactions, another powerful advantage begins to appear. Your words become more valuable because you learn that influence often grows stronger when fewer words are used. One of the easiest ways to lose your advantage in any difficult interaction is by speaking too much. People often believe that explaining every thought, defending every decision, or answering every question will help others understand them better. In reality, excessive talking can reveal far more than intended. Every extra detail gives people another piece of information about your emotions, priorities, fears, and future plans. Someone looking for weaknesses pays close attention to these details because information creates opportunities. The more another person knows about your thinking, the easier it becomes for them to predict your choices and influence your behavior. This idea is closely related to a psychological principle known as information asymmetry. When one person possesses more useful information than the other, that person usually has a greater ability to shape the direction of the conversation. This does not mean becoming secretive or dishonest. It means understanding that every conversation does not require every thought that enters your mind. People with strong mental discipline often spend more time listening than speaking. Listening is far more than remaining quiet while waiting for your turn. It is an active process of observing words, tone, facial expressions, timing, and emotional shifts. While another person talks, they often reveal their intentions without realizing it. They expose their priorities through repeated topics. They reveal their frustrations through emotional language. They expose their confidence or insecurity through the way they defend their opinions. Every sentence becomes another clue about how they think. Meanwhile, the person who listens carefully keeps learning, while revealing very little about themselves. That quiet advantage becomes stronger as the conversation continues. Silence also creates an interesting psychological effect. Most people feel uncomfortable when a pause lasts longer than expected. The human mind naturally wants to fill empty space, so people frequently continue talking simply to reduce that discomfort. During those extra moments, they may share details they never planned to mention. They clarify their position, explain their motives, or even contradict something they said earlier. None of this requires pressure or manipulation. It happens because silence encourages reflection, and reflection often produces unexpected honesty. A thoughtful pause after hearing an important statement can communicate confidence far more effectively than rushing into an immediate reply. It shows that your response is being chosen carefully, rather than driven by emotion. Intentional silence should always come from self-control rather than resentment. There is a clear difference between quiet confidence and using silence as a way to punish someone. Passive-aggressive silence creates confusion and unnecessary tension, while purposeful silence creates clarity and emotional stability. When your words become deliberate instead of constant, people begin paying closer attention every time you speak. That shift quietly changes the rhythm of every interaction and prepares you for another psychological advantage that becomes even more powerful when dealing with people who thrive on conflict and disrespect. One of the most misunderstood truths about human behavior is that attention itself can become a reward. People often think rewards only come in the form of praise, money, or success. Yet psychology shows that attention has tremendous value. A person who constantly provokes others is usually seeking some kind of response. Anger, frustration, lengthy arguments, or emotional explanations all signal that they have successfully captured your focus. This idea is closely connected to the psychological principle of operant conditioning, which explains that behaviors followed by rewarding outcomes are more likely to happen again. Even negative attention can strengthen certain behaviors because it satisfies the desire to feel important, influential, or powerful. Someone who enjoys creating conflict quickly learns which words or actions guarantee a reaction. Every emotional response teaches them that the strategy works, making it more likely they will repeat it the next time they want your attention. This pattern quietly grows stronger over time. A sarcastic comment receives an angry reply, so another sarcastic comment follows. A personal insult starts a long argument, so the insults become more frequent. A small act of disrespect turns into a regular habit because every incident produces the emotional response the other person expected. Without realizing it, people sometimes train others to keep crossing their boundaries simply by reacting in predictable ways. The person creating the conflict begins believing they control the emotional direction of every interaction. That sense of control becomes the real reward, far more valuable than winning a single disagreement. Once this cycle develops, breaking it requires something very different from louder words or stronger emotions. Calm boundaries interrupt this pattern because they remove the expected payoff. Instead of responding with visible anger, you respond with steady confidence. Instead of entering endless debates, you make your position clear and refuse to continue feeding unnecessary conflict. Your energy stays focused on protecting your peace instead of satisfying another person's desire for attention. Over time, People who depend on emotional reactions often lose interest because the reward they were chasing disappears. They realize their usual methods no longer produce the same results, forcing them to change their behavior or direct their attention elsewhere. At the same time, emotional discipline should never be confused with accepting harmful treatment. There is an important difference between ignoring a minor attempt to provoke you and remaining silent when a serious issue demands action. Small insults, unnecessary criticism, or obvious attempts to gain attention often lose their power when they receive little emotional energy. Genuine threats, repeated harassment, abuse, or behavior that causes real harm deserve clear, direct, and confident boundaries. Choosing when to respond is a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. The strongest people understand that every situation deserves a different level of attention, and that careful judgment allows them to protect both their peace and their self-respect, while quietly taking control of the emotional direction of every interaction. One of the greatest advantages in any competitive situation comes from being underestimated. Human beings naturally form quick judgments about the people around them. Within a short conversation, they begin deciding who appears confident, who seems capable, and who deserves attention. These judgments are often based on outward behavior rather than genuine ability. Someone who constantly talks about their achievements or tries to dominate every discussion usually appears powerful at first. Meanwhile, the quieter person who listens carefully, speaks with purpose, and avoids unnecessary attention is sometimes overlooked. This tendency is connected to impression management, the psychological process through which people create opinions about others based on visible behavior. Since first impressions rely heavily on surface-level signals, they can easily become inaccurate. People frequently mistake humility for weakness or calmness for a lack of confidence. That misunderstanding creates an opportunity for those who understand the value of quiet preparation. When a person spends less energy seeking recognition, they gain more time to improve their skills, strengthen their knowledge, and prepare for future challenges. While others compete for attention, they remain focused on growth. This difference becomes clear when real pressure arrives. Preparation always speaks louder than promises. The individual who stayed disciplined behind the scenes often performs with greater confidence because their ability is supported by consistent effort rather than appearances. This creates an unexpected advantage. Those who underestimated them suddenly realize they were judging personality instead of competence. The surprise itself changes the emotional balance because people become less certain about their previous assumptions. Actions carry a unique kind of credibility that words rarely achieve. Anyone can describe future success or claim impressive abilities, yet meaningful results require evidence. Human psychology naturally places greater trust in consistent behavior than repeated declarations. Every completed task, every calm decision under pressure, and every reliable action slowly builds a reputation that becomes difficult to challenge. This reputation grows quietly because it depends on experience instead of attention. People begin respecting someone whose actions repeatedly match their words. At the same time, constant self-promotion can create unrealistic expectations. The more someone advertises their strengths, the more closely others look for mistakes. Every small failure receives greater attention because it conflicts with the image they tried to create. Quiet competence works differently. It does not demand recognition because it allows performance to speak first. Calm confidence rarely feels the need to prove itself in every conversation. It remains steady whether praise arrives or criticism appears. This kind of presence often influences people more deeply than loud displays of dominance, because genuine confidence creates a sense of stability that others notice over time. As respect grows through consistent actions instead of constant attention, people become more careful about judging too quickly. They begin focusing less on appearances and more on results, while you continue strengthening your position through patience, preparation, and disciplined action. That steady approach becomes even more effective once you learn that timing can influence an interaction just as much as the words you choose. Timing is one of the most overlooked forms of psychological strength. People usually pay attention to the words spoken during a disagreement, yet the moment those words are delivered often has an even greater impact. When emotions rise, the brain naturally pushes for immediate action. Anger demands a quick reply. Fear encourages rush decisions. Pride wants instant defense. This happens because strong emotions activate fast, automatic thinking that focuses on short-term relief rather than long-term outcomes. In those moments, people often believe they are making confident choices, while they are actually responding to emotional pressure. Someone who understands this pattern may deliberately create urgency, hoping you will react before thinking clearly. They know that impulsive responses usually reveal more emotion than strategy, making the next move easier to predict. Every rush decision provides valuable information about your priorities, your weaknesses, and your emotional state. A brief pause interrupts this automatic cycle. Even a few moments of reflection allow the brain to shift away from emotional impulse and toward careful reasoning. Instead of asking, "How do I feel right now?" the mind begins asking, "What outcome do I actually want?" That small change transforms the entire direction of the interaction. Words become more precise. Decisions become more intentional. Emotional pressure begins losing its influence because it no longer controls the pace of your thinking. This is why emotionally disciplined people rarely feel compelled to answer every challenge immediately. They understand that silence for a short time often produces greater clarity than speaking, while emotions are still rising. Timing also plays a powerful role in negotiations and difficult conversations. Every discussion has its own emotional rhythm. There are moments when people become defensive, moments when they become more reflective, and moments when they become willing to listen. Someone with strong psychological awareness recognizes these shifts instead of forcing every conversation to happen immediately. Addressing an important issue while another person is overwhelmed with anger often creates resistance instead of understanding. Waiting until emotions settle allows both sides to think more clearly and evaluate ideas with greater objectivity. This does not mean avoiding difficult conversations or delaying them forever. It means choosing a moment when productive communication has a greater chance of succeeding. Patience quietly changes the emotional dynamics of conflict because it removes the sense of urgency that emotional manipulation depends upon. A person expecting an immediate reaction begins feeling uncertain when that reaction never comes. Their confidence starts fading because they lose control over the pace of the interaction. Meanwhile, you gain time to observe, gather information, and choose a response that supports your long-term goals instead of satisfying a temporary emotion. Over time, people begin recognizing that they cannot pressure you into quick decisions or emotional outbursts. They realize your responses arrive according to your judgment rather than their demands, and that shift in control creates the foundation for an even deeper psychological advantage, one that begins by challenging the assumptions people believe about you. Every person carries silent expectations about the people around them. These expectations are built from past experiences, first impressions, stereotypes, and repeated patterns they believe they understand. After watching someone react a certain way several times, the mind begins assuming the same response will happen again. This ability helps people make quick decisions, yet it also creates blind spots. Someone who believes they have already figured you out may stop paying attention to who you are becoming. They expect you to lose your temper after criticism, defend yourself against every accusation, or seek approval whenever they withhold respect. Their confidence comes from believing their prediction is accurate. Then something unexpected happens. You remain calm. You answer with patience instead of frustration. You choose thoughtful words instead of emotional ones. Suddenly, the picture they built in their mind no longer matches reality. Psychology describes this uncomfortable feeling as cognitive dissonance. It appears when a person's beliefs clash with new evidence that refuses to fit their expectations. The mind naturally wants consistency, so when that consistency disappears, people become uncertain about their own judgment. This uncertainty has a powerful effect on human behavior. When people realize their assumptions were wrong, they often slow down and begin observing more carefully. Instead of acting with complete confidence, they start questioning whether they truly understand the person standing in front of them. That small change shifts the balance of the interaction. Someone who expected emotional chaos now finds steady composure. Someone expecting endless arguments receives respectful silence, followed by a measured response. The emotional script they planned suddenly falls apart because your behavior no longer follows the role they assigned to you. Their attention moves away from provoking you and toward understanding why their expectations failed. In that moment, your consistency becomes far more influential than any attempt to prove a point through force or loud words. One of the strongest ways to create this shift is through quiet maturity. Emotional maturity often surprises people because it is less dramatic than emotional reactions. It appears in the willingness to listen before speaking, the ability to admit mistakes without losing confidence, and the discipline to refuse arguments that serve no meaningful purpose. People who expect hostility frequently struggle to continue a conflict when they are met with calm respect instead. Their emotional energy begins fading because the resistance they prepared for never arrives. This does not guarantee agreement, yet it often lowers unnecessary tension and creates space for more thoughtful communication. The key is authenticity. Calm behavior only becomes powerful when it reflects genuine self-control rather than a performance designed to confuse others. Pretending to be composed while anger quietly builds beneath the surface eventually reveals itself through words, tone, or actions. Real emotional discipline grows from understanding your values and allowing them to guide your responses regardless of another person's behavior. When your actions remain consistent across different situations, people stop seeing calmness as an act and begin recognizing it as part of your character. That reputation becomes increasingly difficult to challenge because it is supported by repeated experience instead of carefully planned appearances. As this inner stability continues to grow, another transformation begins to take shape. One where other people gradually realize they can no longer control your emotions, your decisions, or the direction of your life. The greatest level of psychological strength begins when other people lose the ability to control your emotional world. Every form of manipulation depends on one simple idea. Someone believes they can influence your decisions by controlling how you feel. They may use praise to gain your cooperation, criticism to weaken your confidence, guilt to shape your choices, or rejection to make you chase their approval. These methods only succeed when your emotional balance depends heavily on their opinions. Psychology describes the opposite mindset as an internal locus of control. People with this perspective believe their decisions, attitudes, and responses are guided primarily by their own values rather than the changing behavior of others. They still care about relationships and respect honest feedback, yet they refuse to allow another person's emotions or opinions to become the steering wheel of their own life. This inner stability makes them extremely difficult to manipulate because pressure from the outside no longer creates automatic movement on the inside. People who constantly seek approval often hand over more influence than they realize. Every decision becomes connected to how they will be judged. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to earn acceptance or avoid criticism. Over time, this creates emotional dependence because confidence rises and falls according to someone else's reactions. A single compliment can brighten the day, while one harsh opinion can destroy peace of mind. When approval becomes the goal, personal values slowly move into the background. Emotionally independent people reverse this pattern. Before making an important choice, they ask whether it matches their principles instead of wondering whether everyone will agree with it. Their confidence comes from acting with integrity rather than collecting praise. This mindset creates consistency because values remain far more stable than public opinion. Self-respect grows through this process. It is built by keeping promises to yourself, maintaining healthy boundaries, accepting responsibility for mistakes, and refusing to compromise your character for temporary acceptance. Emotional stability follows because your sense of worth becomes rooted in something deeper than another person's approval. Criticism is evaluated instead of feared. Praise is appreciated without becoming addictive. Disagreements no longer feel like personal attacks because your identity remains secure. This quiet confidence changes the emotional atmosphere around you. People quickly recognize that guilt, intimidation, flattery, or emotional pressure no longer produce the same results. The usual methods of influence lose their effectiveness because they no longer reach the foundation of your decisions. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. People who enjoy controlling others often move on when they realize their efforts no longer bring the emotional rewards they expected. They stop investing energy in someone who refuses to surrender their peace for the sake of approval. Meanwhile, People who value honesty, maturity, and mutual respect are naturally drawn towards someone whose actions remain steady under pressure. This transformation does not happen overnight, yet it becomes the strongest long-term psychological advantage because it changes who you are rather than simply changing how you react. Once your inner direction is guided by your own principles instead of someone else's validation, your emotions become your greatest strength, your decisions become clearer, and your presence begins to communicate a quiet confidence that very few people can influence. Every principle explored throughout this journey points toward the same truth. The greatest advantage in any conflict begins with mastering yourself before trying to influence anyone else. Emotional control prevents others from predicting your reactions. Emotional unpredictability keeps people from using old patterns against you. Speaking with intention instead of filling every silence protects valuable information and encourages careful observation. Refusing to reward disrespect with endless attention breaks the cycle that often fuels manipulation. Allowing actions to speak louder than constant self-promotion creates quiet credibility that grows stronger over time. Choosing the right moment instead of reacting instantly leads to clearer decisions and better outcomes. Challenging assumptions through steady, mature behavior forces people to reconsider the stories they created about you. Finally, building an internal sense of direction removes the emotional dependence that gives manipulation its power. These ideas may appear simple on the surface, yet together they create a mindset that is remarkably difficult to shake because every strategy strengthens the next. It is important to understand that real psychological strength has very little to do with defeating someone for the sake of pride. Popular culture often celebrates dramatic victories, clever revenge, and public humiliation, yet lasting strength follows a completely different path. Every moment spent trying to destroy another person's confidence usually steals time and energy from your own growth. A calm mind sees opportunities that anger often hides. A patient person notices details that emotional reactions easily miss. Someone who thinks clearly under pressure usually makes decisions that continue producing benefits long after the conflict has ended. The true reward is never the satisfaction of proving another person wrong. The true reward is becoming someone whose peace cannot be easily disturbed and whose judgment remains steady when others lose control. Psychology becomes most valuable when it is used with responsibility. Understanding human behavior should help you recognize manipulation instead of copying it. It should strengthen your ability to protect your emotional well-being instead of encouraging unnecessary conflict. Healthy boundaries, respectful communication, and emotional resilience create relationships built on trust rather than fear. They also make it easier to recognize people who genuinely deserve your time and those who simply want access to your emotions. Every difficult experience then becomes an opportunity to strengthen wisdom instead of carrying resentment forward. As these habits become part of daily life, something deeper begins to change. You stop measuring success by how many arguments you win and start measuring it by how rarely your peace is taken away. Challenges still appear. Difficult people still exist. Moments of pressure continue testing your patience. The difference is that your response gradually becomes guided by purpose rather than impulse. Every decision reflects greater clarity, every boundary reflects stronger self-respect, and every calm reaction reinforces the kind of character that remains steady regardless of circumstances. That inner transformation becomes the quiet victory that lasts long after every temporary conflict has disappeared, preparing the way for one final thought that brings everything together. The strongest people rarely spend their lives proving how powerful they are. Their greatest victories happen quietly, through emotional control, wise decisions, and the ability to stay steady when others expect them to fall apart. Every psychological strategy you learn today is a reminder that real strength begins in the mind. It grows through patience, self-respect, discipline, and the courage to choose purpose over impulse. When you master your own reactions, you naturally become much harder to manipulate, and that is an advantage no one can easily take away. Now take a moment to think about your own life. Which of these 7 psychological strategies do you already practice without realizing it? Which one do you believe could make the biggest difference in the way you handle difficult people and challenging situations? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your perspective could inspire someone else who is working to build a stronger mindset. If you found these psychological insights helpful and valuable, please like this video. It really helps the channel reach more people who want to understand human behavior and develop greater mental strength. And if you want more videos about psychology, mindset, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns behind human behavior, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upcoming video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.